heading into a new series called Learning Lament, Faith and Sadness of Biblical Proportions. This video is going to be all that you need to know so you can get the most out of this upcoming series. Stick around. Hey everyone, Josh from Empty Church here. Thanks for stopping by and checking out our video. As I said in the beginning, we're heading into this brand new series that covers the book of Lamentations. And Lamentations is a book that gets looked over a lot, especially here in the States, because we don't like to feel sad or lament or, stay focused on things that go wrong for very long. We try to move on and get right back into celebration mode as quickly as possible. Well, sometimes in life, the waves hit so hard that you can't avoid the sad times. So what do? How do you react? And what purpose does this lament play in the role of your individual Christian life and in the broader Christian community? That's what this study is all about. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of the background information on the book of Lamentations to get you ready. It's kind of a primer of sorts, and I'm really excited to share some really good information so you will be ready when every new video, every new podcast, every new blog post comes out to track along with us in our study on the book of Lamentations. The first thing that you need to know is that the book of Lamentations was written around 586 BC. It's a very significant date in the Old Testament because that was the year that the temple that Solomon had built was destroyed, laid waste, just completely crumpled down. After an 18-month siege from the Babylonians, the Israelites were left physically decimated, just completely wiped out. Half of the people went into Babylonian exile. They were taken from the city into Babylon and lived there, and they had to start a new life. The other part of the people, the other half of the people, actually stayed in the destroyed city of Jerusalem. And when we talk about being in the city of Jerusalem, there's a constant reminder that the temple had been destroyed and that life was no longer the same. It was not going to be an easy day-to-day life for those left in Jerusalem. Now, you're probably wondering, well, okay, why is it so important that the temple was destroyed? I mean, what does that matter? Well, to the Israelites, the temple signified both their religious identity and their political identity. Up until that point in their history, their political clout, as it were, was based that Jehovah God, Yahweh, was the most powerful of all gods, and that was where he sat and where he reigned. And that kind of struck fear in the lives of the neighboring countries. So when the temple was destroyed, it was both a religious destruction and a political signal that something had gone massively wrong. The book of Lamentations was most probably written by the prophet Jeremiah, who was living in the city of Jerusalem at the time of the siege and at the time of the destruction of the temple. And he was living in the midst of the people going through this transition into grief and a new way of life. Now, he actually did write a letter to the people of Israel who had been exiled into Babylon. You can read that in the last chapter, some of the last chapters of Jeremiah, to like 27, 28, 29, where he writes to the people who are living in a new land. But Lamentations focuses on the harsh reality of a new life under the siege, where it appears that God had abandoned them. The Book of Lamentations is actually a set of 5 individual poems. Now, while they are separate, they do work together in tandem to paint a complete picture of what was going on in the city. Each individual poem uses an acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet to tell the story of pain and lament. But more than that, they also match some of the ancient literary genres of the time. There is the funeral dirge, which is a song of expression that something had died. Most notably in Lamentations 1, it was the city of Jerusalem itself that had died. Also, you see traces of the ancient city lament, which was written after the fall of great cities, which obviously makes sense in this context. The third type of literary genre was what was called the personal or the community lament, which was the voice of the people expressing the pain that they were feeling. All 3 of those are seen throughout the 5 poems in the Book of Lamentations. You will see 3 main voices in this book as you read it. First, you will see the voice of Jeremiah, who plays the prophet, the narrator who's telling the story. The second voice you come across is the personified Jerusalem, where Jeremiah gives a voice to the city, and it's personified as a suffering woman, which is a very, very important cultural significant part of the story, and we'll get into that in the coming weeks as to why it was so important that Jerusalem had the voice of a suffering woman. The third voice that you hear is the voice of the people crying out to God and wondering why things had gone the way they were gone. So those 3 people you will find, those 3 voices rather, you will find through the Book of Lamentations. But there is one voice that is conspicuously absent, and that's the voice of God. There's no mention of words that God says back to the people. And in a time of lament, both then and now, we can kind of relate sometimes going through periods of life where it appears that God is silent. And if you do go through those periods, this series will help us understand why that goes on, and help us understand how we can turn times of lament into times of worship and times of praise, even when it appears that God is silent. We're going to cover 5 main themes that we found during our study of the Book of Lamentations. The first one is of sin, shame, and consequences. What happens when people turn their back on God? And what are we supposed to feel when our sin is brought to the forefront? The second theme is lament and praise. Most of us in American Christianity don't see these 2 things as equals, but lament and praise are equal expressions of worship. How? Well, we're going to be covering that in the coming weeks, and it's quite literally my favorite part of this series. Third, we're going to talk about the city. And when we talk about the city, we're going to talk about the persons in the city and the community of the city. The city has a lot of names today. We call it urban areas and metropolises and things like that. And it's not just a location, it's not just a geographic boundary, it's the people that live there. So we're going to talk about the city and explore what it means when a city suffers. The fourth theme that we're going to cover is the idea of the voice of the victims. We have a great theology of what happens when we sin. And we have a lot of ways to talk about the effects of sin on our lives when we commit them. One thing that we don't have a great theological language for is the voice of the victims and those people who are sinned against. And without that, we lose empathy, we lose the ability to minister effectively, and we lose a richness of the forgiveness and grace of God. So that's going to be very important that we go over and talk about in depth. And finally, the last thing that we're going to talk about is, why is lament necessary for the American church? Now, we talked a little bit about it before, where the idea that the American church has a tendency to run away from the things that make them sad and the things that don't click right. But when you don't embrace those things, you might miss what God is really trying to say to you, and what God is trying to get into your spirit, and how God is trying to change you. So if we don't embrace lament, then we are missing out on a full expression of worship, and we are not able to unlock certain levels of faith that God wants to unlock inside of us. So we are going to tackle why lament is actually important and why we should embrace it. Well, that's it. You should be completely prepared for the upcoming series on Lamentations. There's only one more thing that you need to do, and that's to go to www.empty.church/sad, S-A-D, sad, and sign up for our email newsletter. That way you won't miss a thing that comes during this series on Lamentations. We do podcasts, we're going to do blogs, we're going to continue to do videos like this to just kind of permeate the whole topic of Lamentations for you, and hopefully your faith will grow and expand through that. Hey everyone, this has been Josh from Empty Church. Thanks for tuning in and turning up, and we'll catch you on some of our next videos. Have a great week, everybody.